Hello, it's good to see you today. Yeah, Josh and I were just busy joking about how different it is to talk to a camera as opposed to a room full of people. And the reason I say that is because next year we're looking at possibly doing this all live, where you will watch this as it's happening live on Tuesday nights. We'll let you know more about that later. But before we start, remember that next Tuesday is our final Tuesday for the season. We'll take the summer off, and then we will start again on the 21st of September, and we'll be picking up in Luke where we left off. But to get down to business today, we are in Luke, the 13th chapter, the 10th verse, and that's the area where we are. And in this section, Jesus is teaching on recognizing the reign of God. How do I know when God is working in my life? How do I know when God's working in my church, through the ministries of my church, through my family, etc.? How did the disciples know that the reign of God was present in the life and ministry of Jesus? And Jesus is teaching them this issue. And so what he's talking is he's saying that the reign of God, the kingdom of God, has come near. And he says in his word that it has arrived. It's like Matthew 3:2. He says, the kingdom of God has arrived. And that word arrived there, I'm going to give you a little bit of grammar, means it is a past event. It has come. When Jesus' ministry came, it came, and it is now a state. It's going to stay there. It's not going to go away. So when Jesus came, the reign of God on earth began in a small way, and it continues to grow, and it will be here fully when Jesus returns. Now, even though it won't be here fully until Jesus returns, it is still here in part because Christ lives within our hearts. Now, and he wants us to know that the kingdom of God is present within us. We are kingdom citizens. We are princes and princesses in the kingdom of God. And when he comes back, whether we still be alive and we'll meet him in the air, or whether we will have already gone to be with him, that we are still part of the kingdom of God. And we move on, and he's now going to give some examples of what it is like when the kingdom of God is at work in people's lives. What's it look like? First thing in chapter 13 and verses 10 through 17, he is in a synagogue. Remember, he's now getting ready to be crucified less than a year later. So he's in the synagogue. It is the Sabbath, and he doesn't wait for anything to happen. He brings it on. He sees a woman who is severely bent over. Now, if you look at your notes for today, if you've printed them out, I found a picture on the web of a woman who would have kind of looked like this woman, and bent over, can't straighten up. She has some sort of problem with her back, probably her hips, and she is just permanently bent over. She can't straighten up. She, in a sense, is, to use the word crippled, she is crippled. And so we have that woman there. And we also have a synagogue ruler, a synagogue leader. He's a layman, and probably a member of the Pharisaic party, and he is grumpy and legalistic, and he wants to be in control, and he wants things his way. Jesus asked the woman to come up, and he heals her. Let me read it to you. Chapter 13, verse 10. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and there was a woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years. So this, whatever it is, there's a spiritual problem here causing this. We're never told what it is, by the way. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." Notice the word freed, not necessarily healed. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and she glorified God. Now, you can imagine the synagogue going crazy that day. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." Then the Lord answered him, "You hypocrites." Plural. He's talking to him and his buddies. "Do not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, so it's something to do with Satan that she's been over, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? As he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the people rejoiced at the glorious things that were done by him. So we have this miraculous thing. Satan has somehow gotten into the life of this woman and caused this physical problem. Again, we're not told how, so there's no point in us delving into it and creating information that's not there. Jesus knows this. He just intuitively, because he's God in flesh, knows this. He brings her forward, commands her, puts his hand on her, commands her to straighten up. She does. Her body is fine. Then all the people go crazy. But yet you have this ruler that's a contrast to the woman in the crowd. They're all excited. The ruler of the synagogue is not, because Jesus didn't follow the rules, the man-made rules that the Pharisees had set in place. Here was what Jesus' argument was. If it's right on the Sabbath to help a mere animal, how much more right is it on the Sabbath to heal a human being? And in this case, he calls her a daughter of Abraham. He's going from the lesser to the greater. And his argument still stands today. If we are so much into animal rights today, if it's right to be kind to an animal, how much more right is it to be kind to our fellow human beings? Remember, human beings in God's eyes are higher in the pecking order than four-legged creatures. We need to remember that. What we have here is the kingdom of God in action. The woman is healed. Now the second thing we go to is verse 18 through 21. And here, instead of a story, he's going to give us a parable, a couple of parables together to illustrate how the kingdom of God works. Verse 18 to 21. And he said, therefore, what is the kingdom of God like? And to what shall I compare it? It's like a grain of mustard, a mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his garden, and it grew and became a tree, and the birds in the air all made their nests of it. The kingdom of God is like this teeny mustard seed that when it's planted, it grows big. And even the birds have a place to stay within it. Now the issue isn't how big it got or how small the mustard seed was. The issue is that the kingdom of God starts small with Jesus, then 12 people, then 72, and then bigger. And today there's over 1 billion people on this planet that call themselves Christians in one way or another. So the kingdom of God has grown. I continue. Verse 20, and he said, to what shall I compare the kingdom of God? He asked the question again, and now he answers it. It is like leaven. Leaven is yeast. That a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. A measure of flour would have been enough for 1 loaf of bread, so she puts enough leaven in to rise 3 loaves of bread. Now what's the point? The point is the little bit of leaven that goes in all this flour is enough to rise the flour and have it grow big. Again, the kingdom of God starts small and it grows big. And it's a picture of the kingdom of God in action. What I gave you on your page is I gave you 2 things, okay? I gave you yeast, because yeast in the Bible is used good and bad. And yeast, the kingdom of God growing, is like these 2 loaves of bread. I just made bread last week, and they kind of looked like that. They were plain white bread, and they grew with the yeast in them just the way they were supposed to. And then as I put them in the oven, they grew that last little bit, and then they baked, and it was fun. But yeast can also be bad if it's spoiled yeast. The Pharisees, Jesus called their bad teachings the yeast of the Pharisees, or the leaven of the Pharisees. So we want to make sure, number one, that we understand that yeast is like the kingdom of God growing. But we can also use yeast poorly. You can treat your children nicely, and that's like yeast working in your life, bubbling over on them. But you can also treat them poorly, and it's your attitude bubbling over on them. So you want to think about that. Now, thirdly, starting in verse 22, we have the story of actually quite a couple of little stories blended in. And these stories, again, show the kingdom of God in action. So let's go to verse 22. It says, he went on his way through the towns and villages, teaching and journeying toward Jerusalem. So he has left whatever town he was in. He is now moving forward. And someone said to him, Lord, will those who are saved be few? That's a good question. In other words, will those in the end who are saved, will there be a lot of them, or will be just a few people get saved? What's it going to be like? And he said to them, strive. Now, he doesn't answer this directly. When the question is asked, it's asked, who will enter the kingdom of heaven? So it's kind of looking at this big group. Jesus now focuses it down on the individual, because that's where it's determined whether I go to heaven or not. It doesn't matter that I belong to Beacon Evangelical Free Church or that I'm a pastor in the Wesleyan denomination. They aren't things that are going to get me into heaven. It's my relationship with Jesus, and that's determined by me with God individually, one-on-one, not group-based. And so he says, strive to enter through the narrow door. In other words, you can picture you got to go through a little bit. There's not a lot of room for a crowd. For I tell you, many will seek to enter and will not be able. Many will seek to enter heaven because heaven is cool. It's blessing. But the fact is, we only enter through the narrow door, and that narrow door is faith in Jesus. I go on. He tells a story. He said, when once the master of the house had risen and shut the door, and you began to stand outside and knock at the door, saying, Lord, open to us, then he will answer you, I do not know where you are from. Picture somebody outside the door. Remember the narrow door, somebody outside knocking, trying to get in, and the owner of the house, God, saying, I don't know who you are. And then you will begin to say, we ate and drank in your presence and you taught in our streets. But he, the Lord, will say to them, I tell you, I do not know where you came from. Depart from me, all you workers of evil. In that place there will be weeping of gnashing of teeth. When you say, so you can see what will happen. And that will be the end of this section here, where we talk about let me get my thought through, where we talk about the narrow way and the wide way. Now, when we end this particular chapter, okay, and in verses 31 forward, we're talking about Jesus lamenting. Now, he's lamented over the people. Some are not going to make it because they're not going to go through the narrow door. They're just going to try to kind of be religious, and that'll be enough. But in verse 31 it says that very hour some Pharisees came and said to him, get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you. And he said to them, go tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I will finish my course. Nevertheless, I must go my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. So they come to him and they say, you don't want to be going down toward either Tiberias or down to Jerusalem, because Herod's out to kill you. And he's saying, well, you need to go tell that fox I'm not ready. He's using the fox in an idea of a sneaky animal, okay? That fox said, I'm not ready to be killed yet, so it's not going to happen. He said, but there will be coming a time. And he uses days figuratively, 1, 2, 3 days. 3 has the idea of completion in Jewish thought or Jewish speech. So he goes on and says, now he prays aloud in front of these people for Jerusalem. He kind of looks up at heaven and he goes, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. He condemns Jerusalem as the leader of Israel and says, this is what you've done. He continues, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. In other words, you would not allow them to come to me and believe. Behold, your house is forsaken. I tell you, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In other words, he now declares that Jerusalem is forsaken. They're not going to believe. He comes down there, he lets himself be crucified. only 40 years later, the entire city of Jerusalem is destroyed as punishment for their rejection of Christ. And this is also the kingdom of God in action. The kingdom of God comes forward, it comes to the person and says, here's the gospel, will you believe? And the person says either yes or no. And for the person that says yes, the kingdom of God is in action. They believe, Jesus comes into their heart, they begin to grow, and when their life is over, they're taken home to be with God forever in heaven. But the person that says no, they are just left behind, and God doesn't continue to call them. And so it's either a yes or a no. And that would be, and by the way, the one we're going to go into chapter 14 just for the first parable to include this. It's another sign of what the kingdom of God is like. It says one Sabbath, so it's another Sabbath, he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. So he's in the house of a Pharisee again. They were watching him carefully, and behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. Now, dropsy I have a picture of. Dropsy is when your limbs puff up and you retain water and you can stick your thumb in your flesh and the depression stays there. I have a friend who's struggling with it right now. Eventually, the fluid builds up in your body and gives you congestive heart failure. You die from it. And so there was a man before him who had dropsy, and Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? He asked a question. And they remained silent. Then he took the man and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, now they're all grumbling inside their hearts because he healed on the Sabbath. Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. The thing is, yes, it is legal to heal on the Sabbath. Yes, it is legal to do this. Remember, the Jews had made all sorts of crazy rules with regard to the Sabbath. And Jesus is saying, those man-made rules mean nothing. Put people first, because the kingdom of God is here for them. And so I leave you with that. Next week we will come back, and we will finish the rest of chapter 14 and 15, and that will finish us up for this for this part of the year. And when we come back in September, we will start right at chapter 16. So there we go. I guess that God blesses you as I pray for you, and he blesses your families, your health, your finances, everything about you, and blesses Beacon Church. Take care. See you next week.